right, welcome back, everyone. We're interesting stuff today. Some recent events have really, shaken things up a bit between the U.S. and the U.K.
Yeah,
And it all has to do with military aid to Ukraine, which, as you know, has been a pretty hot topic.
absolute.
So we're going to try to answer the big question on everyone's mind, which is, did a U.S. official just throw some serious shade at the British military? And if so,
Yeah.
what does that mean for the quote-unquote special relationship between the two countries?
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It is a big deal. So to kind of kick things off, we need to go back in time for a second. Like, just a few months ago, we marked the 80th anniversary of, Roosevelt and Churchill teaming up during World War II.
Oh, right.
And that alliance forged, in the middle of a global conflict has really shaped U.S.-UK relations for, like, decades. But the question is, how well is that historical partnership holding up in the face of all the crazy stuff happening in the world today? What do you think?
Well, it's really interesting to see how this long-standing alliance is being tested right now. Both countries are trying to figure out their place in this complex geopolitical landscape, right?
Yeah.
They want to stick to their shared values, but they also have to look out for their own interests, which, let's be honest, don't always line up perfectly, especially when you're dealing with a situation like Ukraine.
Exactly. And that brings us to Prime Minister Starmer, who's been working like tirelessly behind the scenes to try and nudge President Trump in a certain direction when it comes to aid to Ukraine. Now, what's interesting about Starmer's approach is that instead of just making moral arguments, he's really focused on appealing to like their shared economic interests.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he's been pointing out how continued aid to Ukraine would actually be good for businesses in both the U.S. and the U.K. that operate over there. It's a pretty clever strategy.
It is.
But the question is, has it actually worked? That's a whole other deep dive, maybe for another time. But to make things even more complicated, the U.S. suddenly decided to halt all military funding to Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a big deal. It cut off this crucial flow of equipment, including a lot of those anti-tank missiles that have been super effective against Russian tanks.
Right.
So how did the U.K. react to this, like, totally unexpected move?
Well, officially, the UK government played it very cool,
Mm-hmm.
very diplomatic. They kept stressing their commitment to peace and a negotiated settlement in Ukraine. But behind closed doors, the conservative leader didn't mince words. He called the decision disappointing, and he even suggested that it, sends the wrong signal to Putin.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like they're trying to walk this tightrope of, like, maintaining good relations while also expressing their concerns.
Exactly. It's a tough spot to be in.
It is. But then, just when you thought things couldn't get any more delicate, a U.S. official makes this statement that just throws everything into chaos. Yeah, so we have U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who, during an interview on Fox News, made some pretty pointed remarks about a potential European peacekeeping force in Ukraine. He actually said, and I quote, "The very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years." I mean, come on. That's a pretty loaded statement, right? What do you think he was getting at?
Well, Vance later tried to backpedal and say he wasn't talking about British troops specifically.
Right.
But honestly, the damage was done. You could just feel the offense in Westminster. Like the UK has this long and proud military history, and a lot of people saw Vance's words as a real slap in the face, especially those who served in recent conflicts. I mean, can you imagine?
Totally. And to drive that point home, a UK member of parliament, who's also a veteran himself, called Vance's comment deeply disrespectful to both veterans and active service members. And I think that brings up some really important questions about like the long-term impact of these kinds of public jabs. Like, can the U.S.-UK relationship really handle this constant strain? It reminds me a bit of the Suez Crisis back in the 50s,
Yeah.
when disagreements about the canal caused a huge rift between the U.S. and the U.K. It just goes to show that even the strongest alliances can go through some rough patches.
Absolutely.
But even with all this drama going on, Prime Minister Starmer is still pushing for a diplomatic solution. He even talked directly with President Zelensky to reassure him of the UK's commitment to peace in Ukraine.
Okay, yeah.
But it makes you wonder, is this just a temporary setback, or is it a sign of something bigger, like a major shift in U.S. foreign policy?
That's the big question, isn't it? Like, if the U.S. keeps pulling back from its global commitments, will it force its allies to step up and fill the gap? And honestly, is the world really ready for that kind of power shift? Just imagine a world where other countries are taking on bigger roles, maybe even leading peacekeeping efforts. It's a pretty thought-provoking idea and maybe even a little unsettling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to process. So here we are. The U.S.-UK relationship is going through some serious turbulence. What everyone thought was this unbreakable bond is starting to show some cracks.
It definitely makes you think, like, if this keeps up, could we see a complete reshaping of the global order? What will the UK's role be in all of this? These are the kinds of questions we should all be asking ourselves as we try to navigate these, uncertain times.
That's for sure. All right, well, on that note, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.